Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this February 19, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, back to the Ukraine. The Ukraine President Viktor Yanukovych says he has agreed with a truce he's agreed to a truce with opposition leaders to end the bloodshed of the last 2 days.
After yesterday's horrendous death toll, hundreds of riot police were heading into the protesters' stronghold in Kiev tonight, either for an assault or to relieve colleagues defending their lines. The fighting was less intense today, but officers still hurled rocks and tear gas at the demonstrators. Faced with what is now a low-level revolution, they've also resorted to firing plastic bullets and shotgun pellets. There have been hundreds of injuries. The anger of the protesters is now matched by the anger of the riot police, who now understand the risks involved. Several of their colleagues were killed in the fighting yesterday. 10 of the 26 people who died in yesterday's brutal clashes were police officers, but the majority were protesters. President Viktor Yanukovych has called for a day of mourning tomorrow and has turned on moderate opposition leaders.
They
crossed the line when they encouraged people to take up arms, which is a grave violation of the law, and those who broke the law must face trial.
This morning, the aftermath of the fighting was everywhere. These protests have highlighted starkly the tensions in Ukraine between the Russian-speaking East and its economic ties to Russia and the Ukrainian-speaking West, which sees itself as more European. At this one central Kiev hospital, they took in 150 injured people overnight, including Taras Bilchuk from western Ukraine, who told me riot police beat him unconscious.
We fight for Ukraine, for freedom, and we would like to see our Ukraine like independent country, you know, what's freedom family, but this dictator, they have no rules.
The trouble has infected some of the Ukrainian regions too. This was Lviv. And this, Khmelnytsky, where someone, it's not clear who, opened fire with an automatic rifle, injuring 4 people. As the women of Independence Square prepared for the next round of violence, Vitaly Klitschko, the world champion boxer turned opposition leader, said that President Yanukovych alone was responsible for the killing of his own people. Exhausted police officers know they may have to go into battle again soon. Russia says this is an attempted coup against a legitimate government. But tomorrow, foreign ministers from the European Union, the other side in this diplomatic tug-of-war, meet to discuss sanctions against Ukraine. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Kiev.
Thank you, Daniel. Friends, the latest numbers are that at least 26 people have been killed in clashes between police and demonstrators in Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Amid an ongoing political stalemate, violence has spread to other towns and cities. Here is the background to the crisis in 60 seconds in a video produced by Michael Hurst. We're going to, friends, because some of it, Michael did a wonderful job, but some of the video goes kind of quickly, and I see we've got our lighting wrong here. We'll try to correct that in just a moment. We're going to stop it on each little reading slide, and I'm going to read that to you so that it's clear as to it doesn't go by for you so fast. We may play this one again later in the program too, but I want to play it now because we've got 6 or 7 more video clips on what's happening over in the Ukraine on this, and this 60 seconds will help you understand all these various little different pieces that we'll be playing through the next 15-20 minutes of the program. This I'm going to turn the volume down just a little bit as we roll it so that it won't be too choppy as I stop it with each little clip. Now, the Ukraine unrest is the worst since independence in 1991, as you can see on that slide. Protests started when the president refused to sign a trade deal with the EU. But rallies on Independence Square turned violent, and a political stalemate ensued, leaving dozens of people dead. President Viktor Yanukovych blames opposition leaders for the unrest. Russia has called the protest an attempted coup. The EU has gotten involved, and the EU has condemned police violence and said it was considering sanctions. But others blame the ultra-nationalist right sector for much of the violence. The opposition has called for new elections. Many want Ukraine to align with the European Union, not Russia. And the unrest has spread beyond the capital. Okay, friends, and now that would have been 60 seconds. Let me put that slide back for just a moment. I need to go change some of our lighting because we're running a little hot on the lighting there. Okay, now let's see how we're doing now. All right. Okay, friends, I hope that will be helpful as we play some of the rest of the clips that we have for you tonight. In the next clip, the Ukraine clashes, dismay sparks EU sanction talks. And interesting how this thing it has been a fight in Ukraine that was its political power. It's Yanukovych was wanting to lean toward Russia and break a deal they had pending with the EU, but many others in the country, many protesters, not everybody, because there's some people that live near the Russian border who remain favorable to keep their little community in their area aligned with Russia, as it has been. But now, and Russia is now involved making comments calling the protest a coup, and the EU is getting involved, ready to have sanction talks about putting sanctions against the Ukraine. So let's see that story next here.
It was with shock and utter dismay that we have been watching developments in Ukraine over the last 24 hours. There are no circumstances that can justify such scenes of violence. We condemn in the strongest terms the use of violence as a way to solve a political and institutional crisis. We believe the political leadership of the country has the responsibility to ensure the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms. We call on all sides to put an end to violence immediately and to engage into a serious dialogue. We believe that is the only way to respond to democratic aspirations of the Ukrainian people. As you know, the European Union has been offering sincere assistance to facilitate political dialogue between all sides and also to de-escalate the situation. We continue to believe that we need in Ukraine constitutional reform, formation of new inclusive government, and also to create the conditions for democratic elections. These are the only ways to have a solution for the political crisis. We have also made it clear to Ukraine that we are ready to support Ukraine on its road for reforms, for democracy, for stability and for prosperity. And we have made also clear that our offer of political association and economic integration remains on the table. And of course this does not constitute the final goal in our cooperation. But we have also made it clear that the European Union will respond to any deterioration on the ground. That's why we expect that targeted measures against those responsible for violence and use of excessive force can be agreed by our member states. And we hope that they consider this as a matter of urgency, as it was already proposed by the High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Cathy Ashton.
And friends, that was European Commissioner President José Manuel Barroso speaking, saying that targeted measures would be discussed at an emergency meeting tomorrow. Now, the president of Ukraine, on the other hand, blames radical elements.
Закликаю лідера опозиції.
I call upon the leaders of the opposition one more time who claim to be seeking a peaceful solution to the crisis. Separate yourself from radical elements who seek bloodshed and conflict with law enforcement agencies. Or in the case that they do not wish to separate themselves, they must admit that they are supporting radicals. Then there will be a different conversation with them. I will be honest. I have aides who are trying to convince me to take harsher measures, to resort to force, but I have always considered the use of force a mistake. There is a better, more efficient way to find common ground, to make compromises, to agree.
Okay, and now, as you saw there are more parties involved. The leader of the opposition, we have video on him speaking tonight. He said that President Viktor Yanukovych's regime has to go for peace to be restored to the country's capital. In a video released by the Udar party, Vitaly Klitschko said that the authorities' actions were the only reason why blood is being shed on Kiev streets. Earlier, the State Security Service announced it was launching a nationwide anti-terrorist campaign to deal with a growing extremist threat.
This has turned peaceful protest into a violent standoff. The authorities' actions are the only reason why blood is being shed in Kiev streets. Therefore, people have only one demand. Yanukovych's regime has to go. The sooner this happens, the less blood will be spilled.
And friends, blood has been being spilled, and this has gotten indeed to be lethal. As lethal protests continued overnight in Kiev, the level of the violence stretched the medical staff.
We have a lot of doctors working inside the buildings of the monastery. They have several buildings. In one church building, we opened the surgical department where we have 10 surgical tables doing surgery. In another, actually in the big church. And right now we have people with severe burns, which were shooted by guns, by real metal bullets, shooted into the lungs, into the heart. A lot of people lost their eyes because they were shooted exactly to the eyes. And this night we had 25 people shooted to death. And right now we have to make evacuation from the state hospitals because police is coming to the hospitals and is trying to take the hard wounded people to prison. So right now we have hundreds of volunteers staying near the hospitals, and they don't let police to come in to take these people. And we are trying to evacuate again with volunteers, with cars. And right now we have a lot of intensive care cars coming from different cities from western Ukraine to pick these people. But these cars, the police is not allowed them to come into the city.
And friends, video footage has emerged purporting to show security forces surrendering to anti-government protesters in the western Ukrainian city that is spelled Lviv. Government buildings were also stormed by protesters, including the local branch of the Interior Ministry, Army barracks, and the city prosecutor's office.
We've seen video of soldiers surrendering to protesters outside an army barracks, removing their protective gear, being frisked by protesters. The barracks are on fire as well. The prosecutor's office being ransacked. What does this begin to signal?
We should keep in mind that these policemen who sort of surrendered, they're possibly conscripts, so they should be double-checked. But many policemen who are now participating in this conflict are just young Ukrainians, and they're serving. So they didn't choose the place they were serving, they didn't choose the way to serve, they're just there on conscription, and of course many of them do support protesters. On the other side, members of special forces, for example Berkut Spetsnaz, they do support Yanukovych, and that's why they're so devoted in their fight against opposition.
Okay, friends, and in the midst of this extreme conflict, we've got some video footage that shows a lone bagpiper playing amid yesterday's clashes. Okay, and turning to news elsewhere in the world tonight, friends. Suicide bombers are believed to have taken part in a major attack on the northern Nigerian border town of Bama. According to the army, the attack comes a day after a presidential spokesman said the army was winning the war against Islamist militants. Will Ross reports.
Traumatized survivors of a Boko Haram attack getting help in Maiduguri city. Some are fighting for their lives. Amongst the victims are many children with severe burns. They all fled the town of Izgay, where the Islamist militants killed 106 people over the weekend, most of them men. Hours after the Boko Haram fighters first started shooting, an Air Force plane was sent to the scene. Some of the victims here were caught between the two sides as they cowered in their homes.
There was a bomb blast. We were inside the house when it went off. It came from an army airplane. 2 people were killed in my house. I'm so weak I don't have the strength to talk much. I just found myself here with my daughter.
The attacks are happening every week. Boko Haram fighters often spending hours at each location, killing and destroying homes, schools, mosques and churches, looting and then retreating. And in the latest attack, during the early hours of Wednesday, they hit the town of Bama for at least the 3rd time. More loss of life, more destruction. The army says many insurgents were killed. Since the beginning of the year, there's been a series of deadly attacks. On January the 14th, a bomb killed 17 people in Maiduguri. On January the 26th, 52 people were killed. On the same day in neighbouring Adamawa state, 31 died. The militants killed 39 people on February the 11th in Konduga. The Izgay attack on February the 15th left 106 dead. It's not yet known how many died in Wednesday morning's attack. When President Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in northeast Nigeria last May, he said that every resource available to the armed forces would be used to help crush the Islamist militants. But with these regular attacks by Boko Haram, increasingly questions are being asked about the effectiveness of the military response and of the overall capacity of the Nigerian military. Meanwhile, Nigeria's politicians are arguing over who is winning the war. A presidential spokesman says the government troops are on top. The governor of Borno State says the Islamist militants are better armed and more motivated than the army.
Nigeria is already winning the war against terror, and the activities of the insurgents will be terminated within the shortest possible time.
The hospitals keep filling up with victims. They face a precarious future. Many have had their homes destroyed, and their villages and towns appear anything but safe. Will Ross, BBC News, Lagos.
And friends elsewhere, Argentina has petitioned the United States courts to try to stall a $1.3 billion, that'd be 0.8 billion pounds, repayment to its creditors.
It's down at the supermarket where the pain of rampant Argentinian price inflation is felt most keenly. Last month, the government said stores like this one all agreed to a 60-day price freeze. Now, those same supermarkets are in the firing line, said to have broken that voluntary agreement. And the Commerce Minister has gone further, naming particular stores, their fines and the number of infringements. It's the latest sharp devaluation of the peso, which has pushed up costs everywhere. But the regime cited one staple purchase, the popular yerba mate tea, which is produced at home.
¿Cuál es el motivo para que en la Argentina falte la yerba?
What's the reason for there being a shortage of yerba? Is it imported? Look at how the supermarkets lie. Is yerba imported? Obviously, this is speculation.
Especulación.
It's been a similar story at the petrol station. This month, Shell raised its prices by 12%, prompting a cabinet chief to accuse the company of profiteering.
Shell's attitude, and that of its highest official in Argentina, is always conspiratorial and always against the country's interests.
In reply, Shell said the price rise was entirely down to the rising cost of crude oil and the falling international value of the currency. But Argentina has acted after years of public protests, complaining that official statistics woefully under-record its inflation. A new and revised government index says prices rose 3.7% in January. That's an inflation rate of 44% a year, and it's 4 times what has been admitted before. Analysts see this as a small breakthrough in the conduct of the country's finances.
Central bank reserves are down to 28 billion. So the worst case scenario is a huge crisis again, with people in the streets, looting supermarkets and so on. I don't, perhaps it's just wishful thinking, I don't think that will happen. I think that there will be a much slower, as these measures have indicated, recognition of reality, and therefore a slower adaptation to what needs to be done.
But for Argentinians, there's no immediate sign of an end to the price rises, which could get a lot worse if the country loses its latest battle with its unforgiving sovereign lenders. Nigel Cassidy, BBC News.
And friends, the next story out of Egypt is one that leaves many journalists with some concern about its reporters in that area.
A grainy video with a sinister soundtrack. This footage shows the raid on Al-Jazeera's hotel room in late December. It's been broadcast on national TV. There's a glimpse of Peter Gresta.
Then find someone who can interpret for me.
Then the interrogation begins. His producer, Mohammed Fahmy, trying to explain they were just doing their jobs. But with their colleague, Beher Mohammed, in the centre, they've been branded the Marriott terror cell and accused of aiding the now banned Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Jazeera is owned by the government of Qatar, which backs the Brotherhood, but the channel denies allegations of bias. Egypt says its journalists broke the law by working without press passes.
Seeing him in those prison whites was a shock, yeah.
Peter Gresta's brother, Andrew, has just visited him in jail. He's travelled from Australia to support him at the trial. He says the charges are ludicrous.
If it wasn't so serious, it'd be laughable, because he's a veteran journalist of more than 25 years. He's award-winning. He prides himself on his high journalistic credentials.
But Peter and his team are now inmates in the Torah prison complex, a fortress with a reputation for brutality. Well, we can't film openly here because of the security presence in the area. We know that behind these walls, the three men are now sharing a cell. They're being allowed out to exercise for only an hour a day. Many believe that their imprisonment is a message to all journalists in Egypt. If you don't stick to the government line, you can wind up behind bars. Abdullah El-Shami has been held for 6 months without charge. The reporter with Al Jazeera's Arabic channel is now on hunger strike. His brother Musab is a photographer who says journalists are living in fear. His images captured the hope of the revolution and the return of repression. Lately, he's taking fewer pictures because of the risk of being jailed.
It is my biggest fear, to be arrested, because I know that it's going to take months, if not years, before going out. And we've seen how journalists in Egypt have been detained for the most absurd reasons, and they continue to spend their, months of their lives. And a day in prison is really like no other day.
Peter Gresta and his colleagues now face a day in court. He says their only offence here was to cover all sides of the story. Critics say in today's Egypt, that's tantamount to a crime. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Cairo.
Whew. All right, friends, I told you if we had time, I would replay that 60-second outline of what's happening in Kiev for you, and we do just have time for that. Okay, friends, thank you for joining me tonight. That's it for this Wednesday night edition. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again Thursday night with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.